Welcome, everybody. This is Theist. Welcome to the Den, as I've decided to call it. Last time we discussed on the topic of work mainly. We also talked about the uniqueness of Christ, and I thought we would get into that today. So, just start with our definition that we had from last time, just as a recap. The more broad definition was an activity involving mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a purpose or result. The more narrow definition, the one that everyone's used to, is mental or physical activity as a means of earning income, i.e. employment. So yeah, everyone sees it as an employment. And today I thought we would just talk about universal basic income, because that is a topic that is brought up quite a bit on the NEET forum, and coming up with the elections in the US, you have a candidate, Yang, who is promulgating this idea of universal basic income, that every US citizen ought to receive 1,000 US dollars per month. And so I have my friend with me here today. We're going to be starting with this idea of universal basic income. And yeah, so I'm thinking of modifying it. Like, I'm open to the idea of universal basic income, although, given my discovery from the last discussion we had, where Aristotle makes a distinction between income and just getting household goods, because you can get an income to get household goods, or you could just gain household goods through your own labor on the land that you own. And we talked about this idea of a land ownership as a right, a citizenry right. And I'm thinking universal basic income could be modified to universal basic land ownership. I think that would be more useful, because in the end you would have productive citizens, because they would be productive for themselves. And at the same time, you would have something of value, something of worth. You would have your own place to go to if you wanted to, and to develop and to spend your own time growing and developing, whether it was, animal husbandry with animals, milk, meat, all these basic household goods for survival, or clothing, yourself clothing, shelter, a house, everyone needs that. Agriculture, you can do a lot of things with land, having just land, especially land that's farmable. I think this is seems to be an interesting, I would say a basic right for a citizen. I guess, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll see what my friend has to reply if he has anything to add to that.
I want to ask you, does this system of a universal basic land ownership uh, presuppose a international or a one world type of government, in as much as you've got a nation like Japan with high population density and huge cities. You've got places so like Australia and New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, let's say. It would be easier, it seems, to implement such a method and strategy in some place like Papua New Guinea, let's say. Maybe or maybe not New Zealand, Tasmania, but Japan. So then, would the world's resources require sharing? Would that play into the hands of one world government type of system?
Right. Yeah. So, The problem of there not being enough land, I thought about this a little bit, and it might just be a matter of tough luck, sort of a thing. Like if you don't have enough land, maybe you gotta default to universal basic income, and everyone is stuck with being like a wagee, you could say, like earning a wage somehow. Um, but in the case of if you have the land, the crown land lying around, well, why not distribute it among the population, those that don't have anything, any land whatsoever? But yeah, for places like Japan, it's really difficult because of a constricted space. That's true, and so it's more difficult to fulfill that sort of ideal um, structure of citizen rights. So yeah, I would say that you could only do it in areas that are already have enough land. So in that sense, it's not necessarily leading to a one world government. You just have to have a look at what's feasible in your country. Australia seems to be kind of okay. I haven't really done a total analysis, but there seems to be a lot of land. Israel is an example of turning deserts into like farmland. They have the tech to do it. Why can't we do it too? So it's possible because we have a lot of land, but unfortunately, other countries are not in such a good scenario. Maybe I don't know. Maybe immigration is a solution to that. Possibly, if we have enough land, maybe we could take some of the population somehow. I'm not a big fan of that myself, but I mean that's a possibility. Um, Not my first solution or option, but yeah.
Well, if we arranged it then as a feasibility type of method or principle, and we said that yes, lower population densities, still relatively fertile land, where a type of universal basic land ownership can work. With the example given of Israel, where we have what nearly 7 million people with about 20,000 square kilometres or so of land, and turning that land through that was waste and much of it, well, on the level of desert, and turning that through initiative and technology,
Yeah, yeah,
combined efforts into
yeah.
activity.
I think technology is a possibility to use. Like I didn't really want to say this, but because I don't like to rely on technology too much, because I want to leave the option for this sort of an idea for like to work even if you have no tech whatsoever. And if that were the case, if suppose tomorrow all of our technology stopped working, that you would just be able to get your hands dirty and start digging in your backyard, right? And start planting seeds or whatever. Um, that would be an option. But if you lived in a place like Japan, maybe another option, if you didn't have the land, you could use technology to, like hydroponics. I don't know how advanced these particular methods of farming are, um, but you can grow quite a bit vertically if you have the right technology in place. You don't have to grow horizontally. You can actually stack your um, crops vertically. So if you could do that, you conserve space. You don't need land, right, going out in a horizontal direction. You can actually just go up in the sky and just have like layers and lights, like lights on one level, and then the next level, crops, and then lights, and then crops, and then lights and crops, all powered by solar sun cells. Again, I don't know how feasible that is. The problem, I don't like that solution because it involves a lot of technology. So it presumes that you have all of this tech. So I don't like that solution because it doesn't let the simple man on the street who has nothing, almost nothing to his name, just grab some seeds and throw them in the ground and start, from nothing. Um, but yeah, that is another possibility to allow for tech to be an option for even places like Japan, where you're out of horizontal land, but you're not out of vertical land. You can just keep building up into the sky, technically.
Yes, terraces, and of course various specialized systems which aren't altogether complicated, such as getting pipes with holes drilled in them, and soil, and some various compost, and growing little plants in laid up pipes. Indeed, provided that you could get sufficient soil and compost, maybe, of course, the very people's waste itself can be a source of that compost, where you've got the high population density issues. At any rate, even if, let's say, the universal basic land ownership wasn't feasible, there could still be a communal land ownership. And eventually we have to think that people have to associate into some sort of commune. No person is an island, they have to deal with other people. So even if you had that far smaller portions of land, you could share it around more profitably amongst people, a group of people. All right. At any rate, we could still apply the principle, I think, midway between universal basic income and universal land ownership when we think of, well, let's say about some universal provision of basic housing, so the person doesn't have to be in under the yoke of rent constraints, which really set a person on edge, and it's a type of form of economic slavery. It's it is not good for a person's nerves. It is pressure packed. You are always under somebody. You are the tail and not the head there, where you rent and have basically no property of your own, where you can reside in. So if you had then at least some form of dwelling quarters, can this be done, of course, hygienically? They don't have to be huge to start with. At least for the person to live in, where they can then save for better, but they don't have to be losing money continuously by really quite sizable rents, which take a big chunk of their income. So we're thinking, what type of places would this be like? I mean, we can't have just some horrible type of tent cities. There has to be sanitation, there has to be strong government organisation. How are we going to build these things? Where the money's going to come from? You could use the people that don't have employment to actually build these houses, and you could still pay them maybe a bit more. They're getting, as the argument always is, you're getting new skills, like wow. And they could be going to the quarries and maybe places where they can work, well, let's say government quarries, maybe even government mines and government recycling depots, government reclaiming depots of various materials, like wood that's still in good condition from old houses to be used in building. There's something where you can have this sort of system. It is awkward. It is somewhat difficult, but we are trying to get people into a position where they have some type of security. So,
like some sort of safety net of maintenance, a basic maintenance, right? Whatever it is. And yeah, your proposal was just some sort of apartment blocks, which would still might require them to look for an income. So they would have that housing block, and like you said, that is an alleviation of rents. That's true. Yeah, and then they'd still have to obviously look for an income to feed themselves and all that stuff. So that would still be there. Yeah, but that would definitely reduce the stress. That's true, by having a house.
that goes back to the question, if they have to look for an income to feed themselves, if there are not those jobs out there on the market, this gets back to the point where governments have an incumbent duty to help their citizens. Now, how could this be? Well, beyond the commonly laughed at situations where people would comment, I know in the US, that things were going bad when where roadworks were increasing, that such a sign was a sign of a falling, deteriorating economy. Well, you could simply have the government looking at its land and observing, well, how do I mobilise this workforce? How do I make them useful? Is there fallow land there? Is there land that is lying idle within the estate of somebody that will not have so much land to begin with, because it's been given by corrupt aristocracies and just subdivided between themselves? So there's fallow land, industries that are lying dormant, something to get the people mobilised and to at least.
Well, there is plenty of land, right? Like you have initiatives that are burning off bushland because it's a threat, because there's so much extra bushland that it's actually a fire threat. So they burn it off to make sure it doesn't cause a problem. Why not use that for farms? Like, why not just clear it out? If it's a threat, we'll make it useful. Like if trees grow there, right? So I'm sure veggies would grow there quite fine.
Yes, there is at times a question of transport and residents in these places. I mean, many of the do-gooders will think that the government will be creating some forms of concentration camps. Well, could you imagine it like you burn off a whole heap of bushland and you've got some city workforce, some unemployed, a group of unemployed, and you want to send them off there? Well, they need to stay there for a while. They can't commute back and forth. Many might not be too pleased with that. But I think where it becomes a matter of such people cannot do anything else, and they need to eat, and the government does not want to turn them into beggars. That would just show some kindness from the government at any rate.
Yeah, I could imagine. I could imagine an initiative like you have scenarios in Australia even today of miners who will go 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, right? So that they could be flown in 2 weeks, do their dues, and then get flown out and spend their 2 weeks wherever they want. like in the city or whatever. You could have that sort of, I mean, people live like that, right? Miners live like that today.
Mm. We could have certainly big building programs to build some towns and cities. Uh, Again, how do you actually implement this? I mean, I'm thinking of the US here when we're looking at these abundance of vacant houses. What then is the point? Maybe in their country, when it gets to that, you just got to basically just try to restore what's there. You've got to think, how do you get something for these people? A military involvement has grave moral issues of whether a person really supports their military or whether even the country's directive is objectively correct. And then they also are going to cost money. I mean, you could have a military developed and it's just scaring other nations off from being a threat. But does that bring anything to your country? No, it's a cost. And otherwise, the military is involved then in some type of attacks against enemies, and they acquire booty for themselves, and then they acquire the property, and that brings them wealth, and that might make the matter then quite a profitable and tidy income. Of course, you'd like that to be done righteously.
Yeah, I made the comment before, talking about universal basic income. I said, if the government starts running out of money because they're paying everybody all this free cash, they could always start a war and go out and pretty much commit piracy, on other nations and collect booty, as you said. Of course, your caveat was righteously. But yeah, that does seem to be an option, I guess, is maybe universal basic income could be funded in part by military. Like, the military are there anyway, doing stuff when things go wrong and bad. So why not get something for your troubles when you're actually having to do something military out and about internationally or something? I don't know how that would work.
Yes, again, when you need, for it to be righteous, you need an unrighteous group to conquer. Of course, we really don't want that situation. We want people to repent and to reform. Another method might be friendly dealings with neighbours that you could turn to mutual profit. How about Australia and Papua New Guinea, where there seems to be some very fertile land, a lot of mineral wealth? You could improve the lives of the people and also increase the wealth of one's own country. Of course, this has to be done carefully and transparently, otherwise it enables people in a hidden way to acquire great profits, while the natives, the indigenous people, might have improvement, but in a limited way.
What was that? There was a country where this didn't work. I remember reading about, I think it was Haitian economy was like, they were trying to teach them how to like be farmers, but they were just, every time they would send someone there to teach them, they would start out okay, right? And then as soon as they would leave them on their own, they would come back a couple of months later and find they've all returned to the practice of making like sugar mud cakes, like mixing oil and sugar with clay and making these little cookies from them, and totally destroying the soil where they were supposed to be farming. And it just seemed to be a recurring theme, that it's not true that this maxim, if you feed a man, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach him to fish, you feed him for life. Well, that's not always true if he refuses to learn to fish, right? So apparently this was a problem with the Haitians, but I'm not sure how true that story was, but I read that somewhere. I suppose that could happen.
We had a great example, I think, in Papua New Guinea, when we had a Papua New Guinean bloke, I think, that had a bit of property, that tried to set up some coffee plantations, and it's going all nicely, and the people were okay with working for a while. There were problems with the fluctuation in the world coffee prices.
Sure.
However, the natives, led by some rabble rousers, started to get quite antsy when they had to wait for their pay. Problem was, this guy needed the beans picked, and he needed to at least to be picked, and to be processed, and preferably sold before he could give the people wages. So what happened was the people were getting frustrated and saying, hey, we haven't seen any wages yet. Mind you, the people were housed, they were well fed, they had everything they needed. And so they decided not to pick the beans. So you could imagine what happened. The industry collapsed. Now, what do you do there? I mean, you educate people, you need some changes in the hearts of people to basically understand. But what about if for whatever reason they are resistant to the education? And basically, you could say a form of a basket case. How do you provide for these people? So we can learn at least one thing from that. Well, one is not to be naive. We, more importantly, I think, there ought to be an idea, some sort of principle, I think, of a contentment level. You see, with these people, because they were getting their needs, and they looked good. They had Western clothes on them. I mean, not long ago, and I say this not disrespectfully, they were cannibals running around in loincloths. And they still had some fairly ridiculous tribal skirmishes that this guy also had to negotiate through. So there they were, they were Western, nice Western clothes. They had nice living quarters. They had Western medicines. They had sufficient, some alcohol for a drink now and again. And cigarettes aplenty, and they still basically they stuffed it up. So this is a problem. I mean, and I'm not picking on the indigenous folks of Papua New Guinea or the descendants of slaves in Haiti. We could apply this to any type of group, disgruntled group, rebel-rousing type of groups. In this concept of a universal basic wage at any rate, we want at least I think, what objectively we can say our needs attended to. And let's be nice about it. People want a little bit for just a bit of pleasure, or meaning maybe a drink now and again, maybe a pouch of tobacco, such things. So we want to have the person to be catered with. We're trying to eliminate poverty with this principle, aren't we? We're trying to give some sense of security. Now, we know in the Bible God really gave that. And for some reason, this has not been noted. And if it has been noted, it's hardly been applied amongst the so-called Christian nations of England, Western Europe, and even the Orthodox churches in Eastern Europe. So we had horrible systems like serfdom in Russia. Now, you could have maybe systems where you have some a lack of private ownership, but you still need to look after the people in some sort of secure manner. So, how would we do this? How tight would it get? Who would suffer first during times of famines? But at least if you've got your own little piece of the world, even if it were a piece of the world and it was quite a distance away from normal urban living, because so much of the modern life is urban. It's not sort of village structures. So you would have that title, and you could go there, and you would be able to erect at least a tent or some sort of like what the Aboriginals call like humpy, sort of
I don't know what they call it.
tin. Just made out of.
I know the Indians
scrap
have
metal.
like teepees, but
Yeah, but something beyond a tent maybe,
Yeah.
just like a little like shed. And you could go there. Preferably, it's got space for you to like. You can store some stuff there maybe, or in the eventuality of some very trying times, you might have space there to have some sort of little work happening, or farming. But you could go there and you could dwell in that residence. But if you have nothing, where are you going to go? You are dependent on charity if you're in the city and you've got no title to anything. You have no money to pay rent. You basically end up becoming a beggar. For an amelioration of this, for a betterment of this sort of scenario, you need to have very strong families. You want strong families to look after each other. You ought to look after your own. It's a biblical principle there. Children also need to be looking after their parents when they are deteriorating in health. But also you need the church and the churches to fulfil their charitable obligations. And I sometimes wonder what the scenario would be without someone like William Booth of the Salvation Army, whether really the charitable ministries in England, the US and Australia lessened if he had not developed and made great strides in those ministries to the afflicted. And that's not to say, unfortunately, we have the reputation of this man, and his movement has been greatly sullied by basically some bad, evil types that have gone into that institution, much like the Roman Catholic Church. Well, maybe not. I mean, I leave the Roman Catholic movement because that is deficient in terms of true biblical Christianity anyway, contradicting many doctrines. So it'd be wrong of me to compare the Salvation Army to the Roman Catholic Church and say, oh, it's been sullied by having the influx of paedophilia, because it's got so many things wrong with it anyway. But I'll leave that because it's a distraction. So
I thought I would actually play the devil's advocate against UBI for a second as well. It seems to be like a problem of this idea of purchasing power being lost in the community. And what I mean by that is, imagine you give everybody, like what Yang says he's proposing to do as a US presidential candidate, $1,000 a month. Now, in a free market, if you know every single citizen in the whole entire country is now getting $1,000 more than they previously had, what stops you from raising the prices in your store by, let's say, I don't know, milk at 50 cents extra, so that the person who gets this $1,000 finds that his expenses have mysteriously gone up $1,000 every month? So in effect, the $1,000 is pointless because a free market would naturally make up for this change and say, hey, everybody's getting this money, I'm just going to raise my prices. TVs now cost $100 more. I don't know, milk and bread cost X amount more, because they know that everyone gets more money, right? So yeah, I'm not sure if it really works in a free market economy. Do you have any comments on that before I move on?
well, then you simply need to have maybe not so free a market economy. You need to have some sort of government tightening. We can't have, through some shenanigans, the whole purpose then being defeated by everything rising. I must though clarify a point though. This politician, Mr. Yang, is he talking about those citizens on welfare? They get $1,000 a month.
Everyone, every adult,
Every adult
not just the welfare people.
is getting just $1,000 more
Yeah,
than what they are presently.
it's a basic supply. Everyone gets it. It's to be equal.
Well, surely there has to be a cut-off point. Somebody that's on who is on quite handsome wages surely doesn't need it.
As far as I know, it's for everybody. It's regardless of personal circumstances. All you got to be is a citizen, and you're an adult. You get the $1,000.
Which seems to make no sense to me. If that is the case, I don't want to be misrepresenting Mr. Yang, but if that's the case, where people who patently and blatantly don't need $1,000 more a month, it is somewhat ludicrous if you think, oh no, things have risen so that people need. Yeah, but come on, there's people that can very easily cop a discrimination of that nature where they're not increased because they've got plenty. But if you're looking at if we are looking at the person on welfare, I mean, because this gets to the point then of income, income as distinct with goods. I think this is a very important subtopic and controversial. For if let's say that you had if $1,000 a month of itself were enough to live in a reasonable quarters, and I think the government then should become a organised, basically landlord there, and to get sufficient food to live okay. I mean, living far better than many others do in the world. But if so, we're looking there at 1,000 US. You're looking at 250 a week. You have to take out some money there for rent, and of course, if the person would have to be wise enough to realise that you can't live by yourself in a four-bedroom house when you're on that sort of money. You have to share it, which reduces the rent, of course. Okay, and then you've got to set aside for food. Now, if you're going to give, they had this problem, I believe. If you're going to give uh, people cash and they mismanage it, I mean, does it get to the stage where due to the very evidence of the person's own hopelessness and even self-destruction through wasting that money on drugs and gambling, that you have to just basically give the people the equivalent of some sort of food stamps?
Yeah, and that's a good distinction between, like you said, goods and income. Um, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just cash. Yang is just offering cash, as far as I know. I haven't looked in detail at his policy, but all the slogans that I've looked at, yeah, it's cash and it's for every adult, every citizen. Um, so yeah, if we finish the problem of purchasing power, I think the only way that universal basic income would work is if we have a runaway automated economy. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't know, robots are somehow doing all the farming for you. So, I mean, I've already seen videos of like Australian technology of robots examining every crop, every plant with a video camera and spraying like the exact leaf of where the insect is sitting on, right? So they don't blanket spray all the crops with pesticides, right? So the technology is getting pretty good, and if they can manage every stage of development in the crop using a robot, then all they really need is a technician to look after the robot, and not as many people to actually on the farm at all. And I could imagine, you know, that responsibility being shared among the populace, much like jury duty is shared. Random draw, right? It's your turn to look after the robots for, let's say, a week, right? And then you go back home. And so that's the only way I could see this universal basic income work, is if our growth is taken care of by robots. Then I could understand how we have like this basic guaranteed money that's actually useful, because robots are growing the economy. We're not reliant so much anymore on people's 40-hour weekdays, because the robots are doing the majority of the growth and the work for every year. So that's the only solution I see really for universal basic income, which is why I advocate rather for universal basic land ownership,
So,
because we're able to look after our own land.
so you think that Mr. Yang would be better directed to provide some sort of like portion, against give title. Of course, this would put maybe, I don't know what people are paying the trailer parks out of their welfare. I don't know what portion goes out of their money, how that all works. But so you're saying like basically saying you don't you you have that plot and you can basically live how you want in that area. Of course, we'd like it to be a bit different. I mean, it's still, because otherwise that's like a trailer park, but it's not costing people anything. They can say, "Oh, uh, this is my half acre, and at least it's mine as such."
Yeah, I could imagine you living off of you could live off of maybe a pair of chickens and maybe a pair of cows, right? One male, one female, um, and then a sufficient plot of land just to grow some veggies in that. I could imagine that working quite well.
Could you have like into the cities maybe like some side by side villages just fairly close by? Because such people are brought up in an urban setting that might be so radical for them to adjust to a farming lifestyle. But I'm thinking also even with the housing. I mean, you could basically live in one of those containers, those shipping containers with a window and a door.
Yeah.
Or you could have a shed like that, a very simple shed, and the government could use, again, have some industry going to be building these things, using recycled metals and using the unemployed, so basically paying them for their welfare, maybe giving them more and teaching them skills and etc. So that if they show real aptitude, there's opportunity to advance to better money. But making use of them, again, I like to quote as a Christian here, David in the construction of the temple, where he gathered of the strangers in the land, and he got them quarrying, he got them bringing materials in, he got them working. So you can get the idle population as such. When I mean idle, it's those who they are getting something, they will give something in return. But this is all then positive. The government is using them to, let's say, make these, what do you call it, like these ATCO, these homes, these sheds, very easy to make, very low cost, and providing conditions are not too inclement, uh, to make sort of like these shanty towns, and I'm sure there's plenty of examples in the world where they work. Maybe South Africa. Well, it's not ideal, but it's better than the trailer park scenario. So I'm thinking, well, we are trying then to see what can be done to make the lot of people's lives better when they basically have no income. Now, we distinguished on a puristic, in a purist way, like whether or not that's work. Of course, that then moves into areas of preparation for work and study, or work which is something more of a spiritual notion where you're doing things pleasing to God, which is quite a deep type of topic. But my inclination right now, of course, the topic has many more specifics to discuss, and we welcome feedback whether we're being too idealistic. But we're not looking for perfection. Things are extremely bad. The whole history of humanity is a tragic tale.
Present circumstances are complex, so ideals are not always achievable.
We're looking, though, for improvement. We are looking for improvement. Personally, I want to address now the matter of the person and character, the preparation of the mind and body for work when there is no work. So, what you've got to do as far as practices and habits to keep yourself sound, to not lapse into deep melancholy and deep depression where you don't want to get up out of bed in the morning. Now, I think that one's product consumption is a key element here. The Bible says that the glutton and the drunkard shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a person with rags. We also have one of the sins in Ezekiel chapter 16. We have fullness of bread. What's my point here? You've got to really look to your temple. You've got to look to your temple. There's obligations for you to keep your temple. Things aren't miraculously just going to happen. You're not going to wake up one morning and be radically changed in as much as, and I mean suddenly go from being a completely paralytic drunk and you wake up the next morning and you feel like an Olympic athlete. But you have to look to addressing these matters on a day-by-day basis, even like hour by hour. You've got to look at your product consumption. Drunkenness, we could also extend that to drugs and any type of pills. So I want people to be aware, those who are in the deets category and are feeling hopeless, and the doomer category who are also riddled with negativity, that you have to at least look to your own health. You need to be ready, you need to have good mental health, good physical health. That's your duty, don't you forget it. Your responsibility. So, product consumption. Look to good diet. And the Bible speaks about a diet, and one can find great principles in this. You ought to, first of all, watch the amounts that you eat. You can generally check your condition. You just need to look at yourself and say, well, I am overweight and sedentary. So later, in future discussions, I would like to discuss the Bible diet because I think it's integral to your proper functioning as a person and your effectiveness as a worker. It impinges upon your health, which impinges upon your efficiency. So I'll be looking at that, what you need to do when you don't have work and you are under trying circumstances, how you need to look after yourself. That's one area, is the physical. You need to also examine the mental. And as a Christian, I'd like to also bring forth the spiritual. For now, dealing with the mental, you need to stay alert. You need to occupy yourself with useful, let's say, study and tasks during all that time that you have. where you're not generating income. So you need to improve your mind. You need to improve your abilities in some way. Like I say, you have to watch your intake of food, and with that, you need to do things to keep yourself fit. You need to keep yourself somewhat strong and sturdy. Remember this. And you ought to realise that little efforts still help. Alright, so don't think that your cause is lost. Alright, that basically concludes what I want to say. Just to let the listeners know that I will be preparing a exposition on the self-conditioning in order to be a useful worker. Alright, I'll sign off.
Cool. Nice. Yeah, so I just wanted to finish off with a parallel or an analogy of an American law for this right of ownership of the land. Because I found that there's an interesting connection between the right to bear arms that the American Constitution allows. There's a parallel between that and land ownership because as far as I understand, like I'm not an American. I'm a Canadian by birth, ethnically a Russian. I do have some sort of a basic understanding of some of your guys' principles and laws. And basically, as far as I understand the law, the idea of gun rights is to keep the government in check, is the basic principle behind it. And to protect yourself, obviously, from whatever other threats that might happen to you on your property or of yourselves and your own persons. But anyway, the idea of the land ownership does seem to have a parallel because, as Aristotle pointed out, if there's a distinction between getting goods for your house so that you can survive and earning an income, if these are two different kinds of work, and we all know that the government heavily relies on the idea of income because, well, what do? They require taxes from you, right? That's one of their major sources of income for themselves, so that the machine can keep running. Well, as a matter of protest or as a weapon against the government, if you were able to separate yourself almost totally from the economic system by just living off of your own land, that in itself is a kind of a weapon against the government. If people didn't like the laws that were being passed in Congress and all this stuff, they could just retreat economically from society and say, why would I want to continue being a dentist when all of these laws that you guys are bringing in, I'm totally against? No matter who I vote for, nothing changes. All right, I'm just going to retreat to my piece of land, and I'm just going to live off the land. Forget the government. And if enough people do this, this is a type of a protest, and does great damage to the government's ability to function, because one of the major arguments is they need an income to continue to sustain themselves. So I find this a very interesting sort of an analogy between gun ownership and land ownership. If it was a right, not merely a possibility that you could own land, but a right, meaning that everyone ought to own land. Everyone ought to have it in their family line for their generations. They could never lose it. That this could be used as a weapon against the government. Yeah, so anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. And wrap up this episode, I guess. And if you guys enjoyed the content, please go to my Subscribestar page and contribute and join there. Also helps if you like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That helps popularize these videos. And yeah, so look forward to seeing you next time in the den.